Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Agency Journey. I'm your host, Kuba, and with me on the call today is Gray McKenzie, Zen Pilot, founder and CEO, and as many of you are aware, previous Agency Journey host. Gray, it is so good having you back on the show.
Yeah, it's nice to come on this side. I don't have any of the pressure. Just show up and say random things, and then we're going to rock and roll.
Yeah, definitely. And we did make a promise to our watchers and listeners that there's going to be more Gray episodes coming in the future. Well, we've got a fresh one for you today. We're going to talk for an indeterminate amount of time about one project management, what I find to be an anti-pattern, actually, and we'll unpack why we think that that might be or when it might not be an anti-pattern. But let me start with setting a little bit of the context. I was having a conversation with a friend who works at an agency. They had some ClickUp questions, so we jumped on a call. I did, a mini consultation. I hope that would, make you proud there, Gray. And within that conversation, I asked, how do you update your ClickUp? How do you update your project management software? And they basically said, well, we do a daily stand-up. At the beginning of each day, we meet and we ask ourselves, a lot of the watchers and listeners probably are aware of the questions. Like, what typically happens on that kind of meeting, Gray? How would you paint that?
Yeah, I think the classic scenario is, and some teams have tried to do this, there used to be a lot of Slack bots for this. I'm sure some people still use it. But hey, what did you accomplish yesterday? What's the one thing, or what are the three goals for today? And then is there anything blocking you? Or like the three classic questions.
Exactly. Is there anything blocking you? Like, what can I do to unblock you? But the conversation got really interesting from that point onward, because what they said is that this is a mechanism not even for project management. And I'm trying to kind of build the context in your head so you can kind of address from your position of experience, like how you would approach this or potentially replace this. They said, the person I was talking with, that the team members need that to get unblocked also kind of in an emotional sense, they find their work daunting at times and they need to, like, part of it is encouragement, a big part of it is accountability, just having the sense of somebody's there on that call, they're counting on me, or, I asked specifically verbally for help and I received that help. Now, it is stated that I'm unblocked, etc. So it's not all just informational and organizational. There's like an emotional component to it as well. So I looked at this, and the advice I shared on that call was basically, this should not be happening in that. And, maybe it was a knee-jerk reaction, but I said, this should not be happening in that kind of way. And it is a little bit concerning that this is needed in this kind of capacity, both for the project management side, the emotional side. But that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you about it and to kind of explore the nuance. Okay. So they're having a daily stand-up where all of this happens. The manager claims that, this is needed for the team to actually get unblocked and get going. What do you think here is, is there a part of this that is good? How would we potentially move this more to async? And kind of based on your experience, where does this fall?
Yeah, that's a great situation. I am proud of you for jumping on and having that conversation. So I would always want to know the context. Like, is the culture good? Is it a high-performing team right now? Or is the reason to have the conversation like, no, we are not as high-performing as we'd like to be, or there are cultural issues around how we do work together, or, this feels slow. We're not getting the results we want. We're missing context. We're wasting a lot of time. Like, what's the outcome? I think for, the beautiful thing about building a business is like you get to try out all these kinds of experiments on yourself. So as a general rule, I think that type of stand-up, we're going to look back on and be like, wow, that's really dumb that we did that every day with a lot of teams. And that's going to be a phase of, hey, we've got 20 years where this became a popular thing because here are the couple companies that everyone looked at and that's what they did. And so we all adopted it and tried it out. But I think that will go away. That is already going away in a lot of different companies. And we can talk about like what might be the reasons to do a stand-up and reasons not to do a stand-up. But if you're doing it for status updates and kind of purely unblocking it, and unblocking meaning that we block everyone else in the company's time to have one person share their blocker and then unblock it. Like, I think that's going to be an obvious math equation that we're going to look back on and realize, wow, that was really dumb that we took everyone's time to go do that. It's really it's tempting to me. I think it's tempting to any leader to do, like, at different phases, to do stuff like that, because that is hey, I'm going to show up and I'm going to go line by line and be the hero and solve this and this and this and this. And you're all just going to step up and say what your problem is when it's there. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to solve it for you and get you to move forward. And then, then you're good to go and you can finally be productive for the day. That's not a very empowering culture to build. And ultimately that's going to come back to create more harm than good for whoever that leader is. So
that does feel like it, right? I took part in meetings like this, both from the perspective of the person reporting and, when I was in my team leadership role. And it kind of felt like, you set them up, I'm going to knock them down for you. The word you used here, like, being like a hero to the team, it feels good in the moment. But like you said, it's not like long term, it's not empowering. And I think, a lot of people in that kind of situation, they feel, or like, at some point they have a moment of realization, like, I'm making them more dependent on me, not less. And then what to do to actually reverse that trend.
Right. Did you, and you may not want to say this because you might be recording this in order to send it directly back to whoever this friend is, but do you have a sense of what the culture or productivity or performance level of the team is?
I didn't get that far in the conversation. I will say what passed through my head. And what passed through my head is that it is a little bit concerning that this level of support is needed here, but I didn't want to make assumptions on like the overall performance of the team. I think there's a lot of layers to this. Some people have very high skill levels, but there's an element of motivation or mindset. I like to talk about mindset, right? There's an element of like being your own worst enemy. And if that time with your manager direct helps address that to some extent, I mean, I can see the logic behind it. I still think, though, something should be built that's asynchronous, that's more scalable, more empowering, so that they can kind of be their own hero in that sense. Long-winded way to answer the question, but it wasn't entirely clear.
Well, I think there's probably more than this, but there's three main reasons to do a daily stand-up. One is planning. Like, we haven't planned well. We're constantly tweaking the plan or the strategy. And there's probably some stuff like, I don't know if you're inventing something or doing some scientific discoveries. Like, there's probably an area where like we can't pre-plan a lot of this. We're making it up every single day as we go. Second one, I think, would be trust. Like, hey, do I trust that people are actually getting stuff done, that they can be high performing in a more autonomous or async way or whatever else. I think the third one is momentum. And I think out of those three, momentum is a really potentially valid reason to keep a daily stand-up. We can look at some of the largest companies and what they do with they don't often do this with their highest level folks, but with boots on the ground employees in warehouses or in stores, a ton of them have a daily stand-up. And part of that is we're trying to keep everybody bought into what we're doing. And to the point about like, hey, this work can be emotionally overwhelming, or this is just a hard job and the rewards are not that great. There's a higher level of motivation you're trying to deliver every single day. It's way easier to keep a team who's super successful and feeling the rewards from that motivated than a team that's struggling and the rewards are not that great right now. So, and that's just part, different season, just like coaching a sports team or anything else, different parts of the season or different years. Right. That's more of a challenge and less of a challenge. So that's fine. So anyways, I think the motivation piece, keeping everyone bought in, feeling like seeing progress happening, celebrating that, being excited about what's coming next. That's probably the most valid of the reasons. I think for most folks listening, if you feel like you need a daily stand-up or are running a daily stand-up to keep folks on track in terms of what they accomplished and what's blocking them and what we need to unblock and what's happening next, a lot of that, in my experience, going in and working with teams who have done this, in some cases on site or who are currently doing this, a lot of it is just a massive failure to plan. They're not planning stuff well, or there's a master plan or communication. Like there is a plan, there is a vision in the owner's eye or in the team lead's eye, like, yeah, this is what's going to happen, or the person who sold the deal. And so little of that gets communicated that it gets kind of peeled back day by day and layer by layer in those stand-ups. That's where the context actually starts coming out.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that can be done much, much better and communicated and articulated way easy. You use project management tools. You could write this in a document and share a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of different ways to hand that context down and give people clear planning. And the trust piece has to be, there's got to be some, like a lot of this starts with data and running a business on facts and not emotions. What is the scorecard for each person? What are the objectives that they have? What are they focused on over the course of a year? What's the measurables that they are needed to drive in the organization? What are they focused on over the course of a quarter? What are they focused on a weekly basis? And if you've got that stuff in place, then it's a trust thing, trust that people will do it, and then verify it with how are those things moving. And if they're not moving, then you've got to step up as a leader and you've got to have those hard conversations and push folks on those because no one's set up for success. You're not as the organization or business. They're not set up for success if they're consistently not delivering on those measurables either.
Right. So you mentioned 3 reasons. Like the structure is beautiful. I want to follow the structure here for a moment. You mentioned 3 reasons that a daily stand-up like that might be needed. You mentioned planning is one piece, trust is another, and momentum is the third. On the subject of momentum, I wanted to add that I really resonate with what you said in terms of like this being potentially the factor that makes you want to be in one space the most, whether it's a call or, I mean, I'm going to be honest, we just had a team offsite here at Zen Pilot, and the momentum I'm feeling from that, it's still here. And I'm actually asking myself, in an async context, how do we keep that momentum going? Because it's sweet.
Right.
Okay. So we'll get to that. I would like to get to that last. What I would like to do next with what you said is basically somebody's in that situation. They're doing the daily stand-up because of planning, trust, and momentum. How about we try to give them like a specific alternative of, okay, here's how you might want to do it, or how it's possible to get there asynchronously, and also mention the trade-offs of like there's parts of it that may never be the same asynchronously, but still there's kind of benefits to going that way. Would you be open to that?
For sure. So I think what drives momentum? Like what part of that daily stand-up feels like it gives the most momentum to you?
It's the interaction with people, I think. It's the possibility to, like, when you're leaving a comment in project management software, the part that I'm kind of missing, for example, being on ClickUp versus being on Slack. On ClickUp, you stick to the facts, you stick to the information, you want to be kind of concise, etc. On Slack, you do have that, additional element of, just throw an emoji in there, throw a joke in there, throw a GIF in there, right? And same for a synchronous call. There's a room to crack a joke here and there. There's room to get updates on everybody's lives or just see changes. You got a new haircut, whichever, The interaction, it kind of, for me, it feeds me. And I know not everybody's like that. But for me, that kind of builds momentum. And it's like you can see people celebrating their wins or kind of getting, through their blockers. Anyway, trying to keep the answer short. That's more or less that for the momentum piece.
Yeah. So I think the interaction part is definitely a piece of it. I do think there's massive differences between your personality and an engineer. Like, you think of your typical engineer. They're like, I hate those emojis. Like, please don't ever send me a GIF again. Like, I don't want to, I just want the facts. Just the facts, ma'am. Is like the mentality. Here's what I'd like. But I think for most teams, what creates the sense of momentum is the feeling of progress, the recognition of progress. So I'd say if you're asking those 3 questions, and what gets somebody the most excited to keep rolling is when they say what they got done, and there's some moment of respect for that or appreciation of that from the rest of the team. Okay. So, wow, that's awesome that you got that done. So I do think if you're not going to have a daily stand-up where that happens, and like a lot of the worst stand-ups, and you might be doing a stand-up now and resonate with this, is when people share what they got done and there's zero celebration or recognition of what actually did happen. So I think to create that, then you have to create some kind of culture of seeing what other people are doing, the good that is being done, and then recognizing that. And this
Okay.
is, of all 5 of our core values at ZenPilot, the one called celebrate. I celebrate your good work is the core value. That is the hardest one. That's the most aspirational for me. We tried so hard to make our core values non-aspirational and just a reflection of like, hey, what is the team actually known for right now? And that one is the hardest one for me. That we do have, fortunately, we've got a lot of people on the team who are known for that, and you recognize them for that. And I was having this conversation actually in Portugal as well with the team. Is like, in person, I'm really good at that. I see people doing work behind the scenes, whatever else. I'll recognize that. I'll thank them for that. I'll point it out to other folks. And remote, I'm so much worse at that. It's not right in front of me. I've got a million things to go do. I might even see it and just not say anything about it. But I think for like that has to be, that's one of the biggest things for me to keep developing, and it has been a focus for a long time, like surprisingly long time for how bad I still am at it.
Right.
But that has to be present, whether you do a live stand-up or not a live stand-up, is we don't celebrate artificial work or not good work, or like artificial progress. But there's got to be, this is the catch people doing good. Like you've got to find people doing good stuff and call it out. And call it out as it's happening. So that's one of the better things about not doing it daily is hopefully you see it in the moment and can give a shout out to them, call it out in public. And so I think that piece is like the alternatives. If you're not going to do a stand-up, you've got to have clear scorecards, some benchmarks that everyone's running towards that's measurable. Here's what success looks like in this role, on this project, et cetera. You've got to have planned work and articulated that, communicated that, and given some transparency around the information there. So that piece has to be there. It's super common when I go in and audit someone's setup. The level of kind of like how broad a lot of the tasks that are assigned to folks in their current project management system are. Just like, man, I would have no idea what to, like, I know that I'm running in this general direction. But boy, design the website is like, how long? What is it like? I don't have any of the context here around what this should look like. So there's got to be more time spent on planning. That's just a communication tool. That's like you gotta communicate better in terms of what's going on, and you got to build a culture where you're celebrating folks who are making real progress. And when they're not, the flip side is, I think people really do appreciate. We can talk at some point more about the like clarity is kindness and how often that gets said at ZenPilot, and why that's such a truism is if they're not doing good work, you've got to give feedback on that too and try to recalibrate where their efforts are going.
Right. Okay. So a lot of threads to pull on here. I do have to say, like, if I were to associate one catchphrase with you and with ZenPilot in general, that is clarity is kindness. And there's a ton contained in just this one phrase. I do think it warrants its own separate episode, and we're going to make it a good one. So now, on the subject of momentum still, before we dig a little bit deeper into planning and trust, I think it would be useful for the listeners to actually comment on like how we celebrate good work at ZenPilot, or some of the tools and practices available here. Could you kind of comment on that and talk about like why we have these measures, how it works?
Yeah. So we've got 4 maybe main ways to celebrate people's good work. In the moment, I'll talk about that one first. So we'll go in the moment, kind of our 2 weekly opportunities, and then a monthly opportunity to do that as well. In the moment, inside Slack, probably most teams have this, a wins channel or a success channel, or there's something along those lines. So we've got a success channel. I don't actually always abide by putting it in success. Sometimes I'll put it right in the channel where it happens. So, hey, Jeff, like, I know you worked really hard to move these deals forward over the course of the week. Like, here's, I just saw this one come through, and shout out for that. Or, hey, whoever, like, here's what I saw. Here's the action that you did. Here's the results that came from that. I recognize that and want to shout you out for whatever that attribute is that you leaned into and the success that you've had there. And I think that being real time, not being in a DM, being public, like that's step number one. Whatever your tool for that is, if all of your team communication lives inside a project management tool, it lives inside a chat tool, or wherever that lives, like shout people out there in front of the team.
Right.
Second one is we use a tool called 15.5 for weekly check-ins. The whole idea behind the name is it takes 15 minutes. So real quick time block for a team member to fill out and kind of do a self-assessment of the week that then gets shared with their manager. It's supposed to take 5 minutes for a manager to review it, provide any feedback, clarification, whatever. And part of that process is the ability to give high fives and attribute those back to a core value that we have as well at ZenPilot. And so that's kind of a weekly basis. And it is cool to see those get put in. I'd say the downside, and we haven't talked about this before, Kuba, what I don't like about that is everyone's submission due date for that is Thursday. So you see a flood of these on Thursday, but because we're not living in the tool every single day, you see very few happening Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And there's just kind of this flood. And so that's usually like a Saturday thing that I'm reading through the high fives that people got. And often I'm learning like, oh, I didn't even know that this person did this or that. So I think that's generally a good thing. That's not a perfect thing though. The other place weekly that this can live is in our level 10 meetings. So we've got each department has an L10. At the leadership level, we've got an L10 every week. And that's an opportunity to bring any of those like top wins into the headlines section. If that had a tangible result or impact on the momentum of the business, I think calling that out and recognizing that across the team is the other weekly rhythm that's helpful. And that one's live. That's done together. And then the other live place that we do this is monthly. So in a monthly all hands, try to leave 10 minutes at the end of the all hands section for just those call outs and high fives, in real life to the team. Recognize the attribute, recognize the action they took, the attribute they were demonstrating, the results that came from that, and high five for what you did. So those are the 4 main ways that celebrating good work happens at ZenPilot in a remote and sometimes async, sometimes live fashion.
Yeah, and to use a classic Gray McKenzie phrase, that's awesome. Go back to previous agency journey episodes.
I'm really
count
sorry.
how many times Gray says that's awesome. we had a good laugh about that in Portugal as well. So like here's how I'm summarizing it, kind of the gist of it. Like somebody might be listening and saying, "Oh, so they do appreciation live." Yes, we do. We don't like insist. We don't kind of stake our lives on everything needs to be async. But if you want to do more of it async and at least escape the daily stand-up, then tools like 15.5 or making it more of a practice and lead by example to shout people out on Slack as things are happening. And I'll be honest, Slack is pretty good for this for this part in terms of communication. Then that is one avenue you can pursue. I personally really like 15.5, and I especially like, and I would recommend this in any kind of other company I would be part of ever in the future, like not just shout people out, but also tie that to values and kind of keep reinforcing that the team is living the values. That has always been really kind of an important piece of that, where I ask myself, okay, not only did they do something that I appreciate, but how does that tie into like what kind of organization we're building here? So those, I think, were 4 awesome tactical things for the watchers and listeners to try in the momentum section. And I would look at planning and trust next if you're willing to go to those other 2. Okay. Which one do you want to start with?
We start with planning and then go to trust.
Okay. Planning, async. So we mentioned kind of part of the daily stand-up anti-pattern is that it serves a planning purpose where it need not be, and it might not be the best use of the team members' time. So then how do we move planning to async?
Yeah. First thing is there's 2 types of work that come into any agency or professional services firm. There's work that looks like stuff we've done before, and there's work that doesn't look like stuff we've done before. And so you need to recognize right away what category of work does this fall into? And probably the other side of the grid is like, who's getting this work? Is it someone who's done this before, or someone who's not done this before? But
okay,
we can come back to that piece if you want to. But work that's been done before. Hopefully we've got some good documentation around what we did. We're building a culture of, yes, sometimes we have to blaze the trail, but guess what? When we blaze the trail, we blaze it. We don't just walk down the trail and find it and leave no success marks behind, or, any like traits of, hey, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. Hopefully we're building documentation as we go, and it's going to be pretty light at first. It's going to be just a blaze, and then eventually that's going to turn into a well-worn path, and then eventually, we'll put down our boardwalk and whatever else, and like we'll build it and build on the documentation as we go. And as we see this more commonly, is this a path that we like to go down and we're going to do on an ongoing basis, then it'll get fancier and fancier as we go. If that's true, hopefully you've got a really well-built framework for what needs to happen as a template in your project management tool, and you're hitting deploy on that template, and you're assigning tasks to the right person, and you're adding any additional context or any, hey, this is different. Here's the tasks that need to get created. And you're planning that out. You're assigning due dates, and you get time estimates, and you get all that kind of stuff and all of that is a way to communicate and give some level of expectation to your team members around what this is going to look like. That often to an agency owner who sold something in a smaller firm, or to a sales rep in a larger firm where they've got an established sales team, that can feel like a ton of work to go in and build that out. Then you go talk to a PM or a team lead or a traffic manager or someone who's built out some of those before, and it's like, I don't know, this takes me 30, 45 minutes. It's like, man, we couldn't come up with 30 or 45 minutes to go build this out without a strong template. If you've got a strong template, most of the time, we're talking about like, hey, somewhere between 3 and 5 or 10 minutes to go build out a lot of this infrastructure. It's not a big lift. It's just that you've got a difference in personality between details folks and non-details folks. And a lot of owners, entrepreneurs, and sales reps tend to be non-detail folks. And so a lot of the failure to plan properly and put it in something that we can visualize and look at as the team on the other side and actually see, we're supposed to do this here and there, is purely like a personality. Like, hey, I'm not the type of person who likes to build or visualize those plans, which is totally fine. You don't need to completely change, but you do need to pull on your team members to help extract that and get it built then. Like somehow that plan has to get built. So that's the starting point of planning, is do we actually build a project plan from the beginning? Now, if it's work that we've never done before, guess what? We're still doing that. We're still building, hey, here's the general shape of the project that needs to happen. But now we need to be extra clear and spend. Part of this is we're always going to be less efficient when it's work we haven't done before because we haven't done it. We've got to figure it out as we go. That's totally fine. Hopefully we're charging for that, or we're charging ourselves for that and say, hey, I realize I'm not going to be better at this, so the results are not going to be better at doing that. So if I can't pass that cost along to this client, I need to intentionally take and eat those costs as a firm and realize there will be more costs. And that's part of this is my R&D spend is going into the inefficiency on this project. And now I've got to communicate all of the context even more clearly to the team. And I've got to have points in the process here where there are check-ins on what's happened, whether synchronous or async. And that takes time, and that incurs costs to the project that we wouldn't have in a more well-worn path. Right.
So this is fascinating. Well, first of all, I think you kind of inadvertently came up with like a nice 4 quadrants framework here. Here's what my notes say. You've got, like, try to visualize, right? You've got like the company has done it before, or the company hasn't done this before, and the team member has done it before, or the team member hasn't done it before. If it's something that the company's done before, the team member has done before, hopefully they're following a template. They probably know it so intimately that they don't necessarily need it that much at this point, although they should still maintain it. And I found that can be like its own separate challenge, for the kind of masters of a process to still keep it up to date for whenever the time comes to, hand it off to a different person. But I feel like a lot of these daily stand-up conversations are like, some of them might be centered around like there is a template, but I don't necessarily know like how to exactly follow it. Like the company's done it before, but I haven't done it before, right? So, and I think you can kind of tackle it quadrant by quadrant, where it's like, for each of those, it's a different type of conversation. It's a different type of solution. We should dig into this at some point. Then I'm looking at kind of the far end of those quadrants. Neither the company has done it before, nor by extension the team member has done it before. I mean, here I wouldn't be surprised if there was a live conversation, if there was a brainstorm or a workshop, or async R&D involved in that. So I think you've kind of broken it down into like specific different threads here very nicely.
I think what's helpful about that last quadrant is like if we can recognize that earlier and just acknowledge it, which I think people recognize, but don't even think that I've got a choice there. You do have a choice still. Unless it's something that's never been done before. Like this is where a lot of your contracted work may go and say, yeah, we as a company haven't done this before. Could I go hire somebody for this project who's already been down this road? Otherwise, I'm often when teams are saying yes to that kind of work, it's they've got excess capacity. They've got a lower utilization than they'd like to have. And so they're like, yeah, I can put my team members on this. We haven't done it before, but we'll figure it out. And I'm totally fine to eat some of that cost because I don't have a way to get paid for the excess time that we have otherwise. So I'll take it on and we'll make maybe less money per hour than I'd like. But otherwise,
Right.
I'm buying all these hours and paying and getting nothing for it. And so that's fine to make that choice. You just have to plan and say, hey, this is an intentional choice. I realize I'm giving you something that no one's figured out before. Like we haven't done this before. Here's the things that I think are close that maybe will work or be helpful as part of this. And is there an outside resource who can help guide on this or not? So yeah, I think just having that intentionality around where work gets divvied up. And then, as planning continues from there, then it's like, hey, stuff is happening in the project. How are we staying on top of it? So this is where something like the account dashboard, the client health tracker, I think is what we call it on the website right now. What are our practices around that? So many times go into firms and they've got a weekly stand-up with their sometimes whole team, sometimes just delivery team. And they go line by line through every single account that they have. And people are frustrated. That's a 60 or 90 minute meeting. And they got to talk about their own accounts for 3 or 4 minutes or, like such a small percentage of that time. And so having specific rhythms and routines around the client health tracker. Hey, here's the fields that you're updating every single week. Here's the habit I have as the head of client success or whatever my role is, production director, whatever that role might be. Here's what I'm looking at those. Here's the way that we're giving feedback. Here's the questions that we're asking and answering. How are we measuring client health? How are we measuring our internal attitude towards that? The better, and then what gets escalated out of there is any client health issues that drop to X level. Now they automatically go to our weekly team meeting, and now we're just focused on the accounts that had major changes, and there's something that looks different. But we can put a ton of that work. We can make it way more intentional. When you do, hey, you've got 3 minutes to walk me through all your accounts. The level of detail I'm getting from you is going to be way lower than if we did this intentional client health tracker practice. And the level of feedback you're going to get from me or the level of accountability from me is going to be way lower. So inevitably, results are going to be worse than the synchronous, like very fast paced run through. That's really hard to actually pay attention to what's happening.
Yeah. So I think what we're arriving at here is kind of layers of planning. And I think what's lacking in a lot of organizations, this might be an internal team, it might be kind of externally facing, is like that there's I've heard this phrase in the IT world. I'm not sure how prevalent it is in the agency world. Information radiator. You ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a place that kind of radiates information that's up to date to a level of detail that is useful but not overwhelming. You can pull on threads, you can ask questions. In ClickUp, you can leave a comment, tag somebody, so everybody's up to date on as needed on what's in the radiator. Sorry, and then you just escalate, like you mentioned, stuff that gets past a certain threshold. So I think we went deep into the planning piece here to try and make this a fairly compact episode. I think I would go into trust later. Look, watchers and listeners, you've got questions about any of this, reach out to us. We're happy to go deeper. Find us on LinkedIn or message us on Pilot account. Leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Let's talk, okay? This is all part of a conversation, starting with a conversation I had. Now we're recording. I'm sure there's going to be conversations afterwards. But let's cover the third reason people might be doing daily stand-ups. Let's cover the trust part. And again, kind of in an async context, like this is the golden question to me. It feels like how do you build trust in an async context? Like in the world of like quiet quitting and people holding, two jobs at once, asynchronously, like how do you make it so that you can trust them without micromanaging them? They can feel kind of safe also without being like overly monitored. Okay, there's a lot in this question, but like how do you start unpacking this?
Yeah, I think this all comes down to, so trust is built when expectations are met consistently over time. I know I've said
Right.
this on the podcast before, but not, you're way better off purely meeting the bar over and over and over than, 1 week we're way above the bar, we're doing the craziest things, and the next week we're way below the bar. Like, trust is built around just consistently meeting expectations. It's great if you exceed expectations as well, but if you consistently are hitting them and those are set, shared expectations, that's the key piece here. Clarity is kindness. Is those expectations have to be shared. We have to agree on what good looks like. So that setting expectations piece is the strongest piece. Is it that I want to be able to see that your computer is on for 8 hours a day and how many keystrokes you hit? And like, is that the expectation that you're setting for people? I don't think so. Like but subconsciously, that's often the expectation that does get, hey, we're going to plug in Hubstaff so we can take screenshots of your computer every 10 minutes. And I can know when you're online or not online. Like the expectation is be online and be busy. And it's too easy for that to steer away from the expectation being produce really good work. And here's what that looks like. Here's the metrics that are tied to that. Here's the number of deliverables I expect. Here's the amount of traffic increase I expect. Here's the amount of leads generated that I expect. So I think that's the big first piece around trust is just having shared expectations around what good looks like. The second piece has to be then having conversations around that and seeing that those expectations are being or not being met, and addressing that. We're either celebrating good work or we're addressing performance. And everything else that happens then, like you've got to decide, hey, how much, this is the thing that you've got to be really clear in your culture about. Do you want people who are hungry and willing to grow or not? Because the expectation for somebody in the first 3 months is not going to be the same expectation you have for them 6 months and 9 months later. And so you just need to be intentional in setting that, hey, I believe in your potential so much and what you can do, that these goals are going to be, these are realistic and achievable for this quarter. But those are not going to be my same goals as we continue to grow as an organization a year from now. Like those goals are going to be loftier. And that may feel unfair to team members, like, wow, this bar just, like, I can never do good enough. The bar just keeps changing. And so the way that you talk about, communicate about, and message that has to be clear that that is not all of this creates more impact. I believe in your ability to grow and your potential to grow. And so the bar is going to keep changing. And I assume on the flip side that you are hoping your compensation changes as well as we go. And like, you can earn more, you can be more successful here, or your role here grows and evolves. But those two things are tied together. Like, what's the impact to the organization and how can we keep laddering that up? And what's the impact to you personally and how can we keep laddering that up? And if you've got lower expectations of folks, like, hey, I just want somebody who's in, like, I've had this experience hiring for specific roles where I've said, like, hey, this is the role and this is the role that I need you to be in for a minimum of 2 or 3 years. So if you I don't actually want somebody who's as ambitious in this specific role. I need somebody who's super, there's just different traits and there's trade-offs for each of those. But I think a lot of trust is around being super clear about expectations and then managing the business around the data. What's the, how well are they performing against those specific benchmarks versus steering away from that.
I love it. You mentioned a lot of very interesting things here, and also like something super quotable, like trust is when expectations are met consistently over time. I feel like there's also like a meta layer to this because we're talking about kind of bringing back the context of this daily stand-up. So on the one hand, there's the issue of trust. Like, I can trust my team members to do this work as requested, when requested, by that time. What also came into my mind as you were speaking is expectations around actually how we communicate about work And specifically in our context, I mean, being clear, expectations around the usage of ClickUp, right? This is the difference between working with, a company that just does ClickUp and a company that either is ZenPilot or ZenPilot trained, is that it is much more clear what the expectations are around communication within the tool. Like if there's overdues, if there's missed comments, if Slack is being used for communication that should be in ClickUp, that is flagged very quickly. It is very, again, clarity is kindness. It is very clearly stated, this is not what we're trying to build here. This is not how we're trying to run and operate here. And I feel like that helps build trust kind of in both ways. On the one hand, like, as a member of the team, I can trust that if I overstep something in terms of communication, I'll, get the right feedback to get back on track. On the other hand, within leadership, indicating that to the team members means that, like, if there isn't an update in ClickUp, that means nothing happened. Or if there is an update in ClickUp, I can trust that information. That is super crucial, because if that trust gets eroded, then, I feel like that's when these meetings, like these stand-ups, that's kind of the, okay, let's get clear on what is actually happening. Let's get on a call. And that's kind of when you give up, right? Does any of that track?
Yeah, I think for sure. And I think there's probably, like, the takeaway here isn't necessarily like, hey, never do stand-ups or kill your stand-ups right now. It is, hey, are you wasting time on this? Like, are you eating up a lot of folks' time, either to fulfill an emotional need that you have, or to fulfill, it's probably both, or to fulfill a lack of planning, or like basically a vacuum around information, and a vacuum around clear expectations that you've not created. Like, this is your crutch for the lack of infrastructure that you've got built right now. So all of that for sure resonates. And then I think there might be a season, like there are seasons when we get injured where we do need crutches. So there might be a season where this makes sense. There might be a specific team where, hey, I realize we've got unclear expectations set right now, or I realize we need to find some way to pick up and create more momentum. And so for this specific season, we're going to plug in a daily stand-up, or we're going to get together 3 times a week to do this. Like, I'm willing to pay the inefficiency cost, because we've got to be, like, we need that live time together until we figure out how to build the infrastructure. So I think that's where I would land on this ultimately is, generally speaking, and this is in my experience, like the vast majority of the time, we've been able to eliminate a lot of stand-ups over the years through our work with clients. Generally speaking, it's a crutch, but crutches are useful sometimes, and so don't throw it out entirely and never look back at it as an option.
Yeah, right. If you're hurting, you might need these crutches, right?
Yep.
Like what you mentioned is, to me, it's kind of like a war room type of situation. Something, an area of the business might be kind of strongly in the red, then, you need to hunker down on it a little bit more. Just as long as it doesn't become, like, through sheer inertia, something that you do out of habit and it's really inefficient. Awesome. Lovely. Way to tie a bow on this whole subject. I feel like we should give the watchers and listeners, as a last point, kind of stuff to pursue. Like, if any of this resonated, if they want to kind of improve their planning, trust, momentum, like, what would you recommend as either resources, reading material, or, I don't know, maybe part of this is somebody's listening to this and they would actually be a good fit to work with us. I feel like that's a relevant message to leave too. What would you say?
Right. I would certainly say that, like, the best thing that you can do in that situation is to have a conversation with us. I realize this is not like, there's probably a good chunk of folks who hear this, who would have a conversation with us, who the first thing they should do is not work with us immediately. And I think there's a good chance that would be the recommendation in a number of these situations. That's been my recommendation to folks is, hey, you need to fill this people gap first, or you need to work on, like, this specific area first. And then I'd love to help you get clear on the data and know how to get that accurately, get clear on what expectations you're giving to your team, and help ultimately, our mission is to help create more healthy, more profitable, more productive teams. And so that piece can all be a part of this, but there's aspects of that picture that, even though that's our mission, we don't solve yet. Like, we don't solve the staffing issue here, or we don't solve, there's pieces where we've got to refer to other people or say, hey, wow, that's a strange situation. And for what you're looking for, like, I don't know where to go. So I'm sorry that we talked and I don't have a better answer, but that's just the truth. So I think that is the direct call to action. There's certainly more reading to do around this. And a lot of the, this is no secret that we run on EOS. So a lot of the books in the Entrepreneurial Operating System library are helpful. There's a ton of repetition between those, and sometimes it's a little bit of a slog to work through them. But there's books there that are helpful. There's a whole bunch of like team and productivity books that we could get into as well. But I really think if you're trying to take action, like the two places that I would go are a conversation with us, and maybe scheduling that is the first thing, and the second thing is journaling, like just taking some time to write out what's missing in our, if I was Kuba and I was looking at this with an outside set of eyes, like what would the advice that he would give me be, or what would the questions be that he would ask? Just some of the writing around here's what hurts the most right now and what do I really want. Talked a lot about that in the past too. Like, what do I really want this to not even necessarily look like what do I ultimately want this to accomplish and create?
Right.
And that's the starting point. And then working backwards from there by getting the help becomes much easier.
Yeah, I love that. I imagine, this kind of journaling exercise, it reminds me of one of our recent episodes where you mentioned the 5 whys exercise. Okay, we're doing daily stand-ups and I'm not feeling so sure about them. Why? Because it feels inefficient. Why? Or, you can dig into like why they feel necessary. Like you mentioned, you might arrive at a variety of different, conclusions there. And, one of the conclusions might be maybe I don't have the right people on this team. Maybe that's where the key issue lies. And like you mentioned, there's people to talk with about that. If it turns out it's operations, if it turns out, you don't have good data in ClickUp or you don't trust that data in ClickUp, we are the people to talk with. Go to zenpilot.com/call if you want to just go the easy route or explore our resources first. There's a lot of our kind of thinking there about the Zenpilot system. But enough about that. I think that's enough of a CTA. I think this is awesome, Gray. Like, we took this daily stand-up issue and we treated it as like a whole, tip of the iceberg for everything that might be lying underneath. So I hope this was informative for you as well, watchers and listeners. Don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, Agency Journey, Zenpilot on YouTube, and on all the podcast platforms. And that's it from me. Any other final thoughts?
No, that's great. Yeah, I think we've droned on long enough, but this is a fun one to dig into.
This was super fun. Okay, so thank you, Gray. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here today, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.